Next up, a brand new loop we haven't seen, the for of. So for of is newer in JavaScript. It's not just new to us in this course, but it's also newer in JavaScript, and unfortunately that means that it is not supported in Internet Explorer. But that should not stop you from using it, at least it should not stop you from learning it, because it is a lot better. It's a significant improvement for iterating over arrays and other iterable. So we'll get into what that means. Here I have an array of different subreddits on Reddit. It's just a bunch of strings, doesn't really matter. Now if I wanted to print each one out with what we know, I could do a for loop. For let I equal 0, I is less than subreddits.length, and then I plus plus, and then let's do, maybe I'll print out a string. So we'll do console.log, and that string will be a template literal that will say, visit reddit.com/r/ and then the subreddit name goes right in here. So $ curly braces, and then I want to put cringe or books or chickens right in there. So I need to access subreddits square bracket I, right? Inside of those curly braces, that should do it for me. Let's see, refresh the page, open up the console, and it does work. Now, that's kind of a lot of, it's not a huge amount of work, but it's kind of a lot of weird syntax just to iterate over an array, right? We've got to work with I. So that does work. It's just not as clean as the for of loop, which we'll take a look at right now. It looks like this. For, and then in parentheses, some variable name that we come up with of, the actual word of, some iterable thing. So to start, that iterable thing will be an array. So I could rewrite this like this, for let, and then I need to come up with a variable name, and it's actually going to represent the individual elements in my array. So for let, let's go with sub of subreddits, just like that. Now this is a significant difference. I'm making a variable here called sub, and if I just console.log that sub, let's just make sure that works. There we go. It's actually representing, it's storing each element in the array. We don't have to worry about I, the index, because right here we're just making this I variable, the index, for the sole purpose of accessing individual elements out of the array. We're never using I to do any math, or we don't really care about what I is, except for the fact that it helps us get out each element. But here, this is shorter, but it's also a lot easier to read. Let sub of subreddits. I can come up with, I could name this subreddit, I could name this anything. This is just a variable that will exist each time through the loop, and it will store, at the first time through, cringe, and then books, and then chickens, and then funny. So if I wanted to just match what we have here, I would just add sub right there. Or if I name this subreddit, make sure I have 2 D's in there, subreddit, just like that. I just need to match what I have. And there we go. We get the same outcome, but this is a lot nicer in my opinion. For of is certainly an improvement over regular for loops. Not in every situation, but for situations where you're iterating over something like an array and you don't need the index, you don't care about it. If you do need the index, and sometimes there are situations where you need that index, it can be better to use a for loop. So here's an example though, where I'm using 2 for loops, nested. I and j are the 2 variable names I came up with. Very standard, very boring, and honestly not very easy to read. If I rewrote this using for of loops, all that I'm doing is looping over the seating chart where we have 3 different rows. I'm looping over into each row and then over each student and printing them out. Nothing very exciting. But I could rewrite it like this. For let row of seating chart, just like that. And then inside of here, for let student of row, and then console.log student. So a lot easier to read because I can actually write a variable that corresponds to the individual element, not a variable that corresponds to an index or just a number that I then have to plug into the array. Here I don't have to plug anything into the array. Row references each element in the parent in the first array, and then for let student of that row array, student references this, and then this, and then this. And I think overall that's pretty easy and just way better to look at, way better to write. It's a far better experience. We can verify that it does give us the same outcome, and it does. So here's the first batch all the way down to Erica, and then here's the second batch, exactly the same outcome. So for of loops, massive improvement. Now let's revisit what I said about iterable objects right here. Oh, here we go. A nice and easy way of iterating over arrays or other iterable objects. So there are other things that we can use a for of loop with. I'll show you another example, which is a string. For, let's do char for character of, and then, I don't know what should, I guess hello world. It's not very exciting, but we can do that. Console.log char, sure, just like that. And there we go, HELLO space, blah, 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 blah. Each character is being iterated over. So char is going to be H, and then it will be E, and then L, and then L. So that's just one example of iterating over something that is not an array. Now there are other iterable objects. If you go to MDN, you take a look at the page for of. There are things like maps and sets, which we have not yet talked about. One thing that I see a lot of students attempt to do is work with objects in for of, and that's actually the subject of the next video, so I'm not going to get ahead of myself. But long story short, most commonly for of is used with arrays. You can use it with other things that are considered iterables by JavaScript, like strings. That's really all we know so far. And the syntax is super nice, compact, for some variable of some iterable, do something usually using that variable. Cool.